It's a brilliant, brilliant event, and you'll come away with lots of new ideas and a better understanding of this incredible exponential world. You get to speak to the smartest people like you trying to figure this out, but also the people on stage. They're the experts. So we get all of that, all in one place, in Singapore. What more can you ask? See you at Token 2049.
Good afternoon. It'll be very fun for me because I don't have to talk. I get to ask a question to two fine gentlemen here. We're going to talk about from data to dollar. So first question, I want to go to Benedict. In this conference and in the discourse of AI in general, there are a lot of terms that has been thrown around. Is there any definition that you would like to clarify before we move to our discussion?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before. I mean, I always find that AI is a term that just creates confusion. There's an old joke from the 70s that AI is whatever doesn't work yet, because once it works, it's just software. And in particular, as we're trying to talk about everything that's been happening in the last 18 months, I just think it's kind of useful to kind of get specific. Like, we had machine learning started kind of 10 years ago, and that did one set of things. And now we have generative AI models, mostly LLMs, that do this other set of things, and we're trying to think about what they might do next. And at one level, it's kind of a pedantic point, but it's kind of important because there's one view of where this is all going to go, which is to say it's going to end up as just more software, and then there'll be something else. And there's another view that says, no, this is the transformative change, and we're going to be in a world before and after this, and it's much bigger than just software. So it's kind of important to kind of be specific and tangible about what you're trying to talk about.
Absolutely. I think our discussion will be very much focused on the current large language model and Gen AI space. But Raoul, in this space, you've seen a lot. And what is your most important observation that you wish more people know?
You know, I come at this with an economics viewpoint. I think, and I talked a bit about this yesterday, is how GDP growth is calculated is population growth plus productivity growth and probably debt growth. This changes both productivity, but it especially changes population. Because this is infinite knowledge and will be at zero cost. And then you've got infinite humans in terms of the robots. That I don't think people understand how profound that is.
So whenever in history such transformative technology appear, often also bring incredible economic opportunities as well. Question to both of you, investability in AI, Gen AI, large model. Ben, you start.
Yeah, I think we probably agree on this in generality. There's a sort of short-term problem, which is unless you've got in the position to write $500 million or $1 billion checks in people creating new foundation models. So you can either do that, you can give Anthropic or Mistral or somebody $500 million.
Right.
And then there's a question of whether that's a good investment given what's happening with open source as well, and whether those are sustainable companies and sustainable valuations. But there's those companies, and then there's everything else where you're building on top of an API call to someone else's model, and you're not clear what that model is going to be doing in 3 or 6 months' time, and it may have swallowed what you were planning to build. So this is the thing people were talking about last autumn, the so-called thin GPT wrappers.
Right.
And the kind of the challenge is, well, which is it? And it's very unclear what that space looks like right now. Now, there's a view that says that every startup today runs on AWS or Azure or GCP, and we don't say that Snap is a GCP wrapper, because there's a lot of product that's built on top of that, and that's clearly what Meta is trying to do by open sourcing Llama, which is that LLMs just become commodity infrastructure, and you build your company on top of that, just as you built your company on commodity storage, and that's kind of one path we could go down. There's obviously another path we could go down, which is there just is no space for anything other than 3 or 4 LLMs, and they do everything, and there's no other companies. That would, I don't know if sort of that's kind of the more radical view. I'm not sure I'd agree with that. I think Raoul probably does agree with that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the challenge. Like last year, this year, if you're a VC, you either write a $500 million check or you're investing in somebody who's building on an API that's changing all the time.
I hope that's
the other way
case.
of looking at it is the disruption of existing businesses. He who adopts this technology the fastest may completely disrupt a sector. So that might be investable. As opposed to thinking, can we just invest in these companies that are building AI? Maybe it's the ones who implement it.
So can you give us an example? For example, in Real Vision, how are you adopting AI, make your business much more efficient?
So Real Vision is about basically learning about finance and investing. AI is so well suited to do that. It can already read charts and do technical analysis as well as a human. It can read a balance sheet. It can understand financial terms. It can summarize all of the data that's held within a network and feed it back. So that becomes a superpower. Private data sets are a superpower. So if you've got it, for example, within Real Vision, you can serve it back to people. And what you're doing is leveling the playing field. So people who don't know so much about finance, everything gets leveled by this AI. It's really amazing.
But how much you're paying every month for that kind of ChatGPT costs? Not much. So most of those AI companies actually, based on this formula, are not very investable.
No, I don't think they are. The applications could be, so it might revolutionize us versus our competition. So that's great. But everything else, it seems it's all a scale business.
I hope we can have more opportunity for not just the 4 or 5 companies controlling.
You want to unfuck your shit? This is live.
Yeah, that's being recorded. Hey, listen, if you want to unfuck your future, then come and join us in the Real Vision community. Incredible platform, amazing content, some of the smartest people in the world, and amazing tools. And guess what? It'll cost you nothing. Come to realvision.com. I'll see you there, and let's help you unfuck your future.
So, Benedict, you've seen many different waves of transformative technologies come and go, and how is this current generative AI and large language model wave different compared to the previous transformative technologies?
Well, I like the way you see how many things I've seen come and go. I'm not quite as old as Raoul, I don't think. Well, so I have a book written sort of 10 or 15 years ago, which is a history of financial bubbles and financial panics, and the title is This Time It's Different, which is what people always say in each bubble. And the problem is that they're always right, that it is different, but it's still a bubble. And, if we're not in a bubble now, we will be just deterministically, because that's what happens when you have a new technology. There's almost always, you get to a bubble. And you get kind of bubbly thinking around the edge of that, and people start forgetting about the laws of physics and the laws of economics, and that things don't always go up forever. And they say, oh, but this time it is always going to go up forever. The challenge, of course, is that sometimes, every now and then, it actually does. So beyond that, history doesn't repeat, but it tends to rhyme. And you can see certain patterns repeating very obviously. So whenever there's a platform shift, the incumbents always try and make it a feature. And so you see Google and Microsoft and Adobe sort of spraying LLMs all over their product. Every text box on the internet's getting an LLM this year. And you see startups trying to unbundle the incumbent, so they'll try and peel something out of Oracle or Salesforce or Excel or Gmail or something and pull it out into a new company, or they'll try and unbundle Goldman Sachs, or they'll try and unbundle any number of existing companies and say, oh, but we can do that one thing completely different, in a completely different way, using machine learning, using cloud, using mobile, using the web. We can unbundle it into a new thing. And then sometimes someone will come along and work out a way to completely reinvent an industry. And the challenge trying to predict that is, I've said this a couple of times in the last few days, like, imagine it's the late 90s and we're all sitting around thinking, well, what is the internet going to mean for the economy? And you can get a whiteboard and you can say, okay, you can imagine the kind of deterministic frameworks you come up with about, well, clearly this is going to be a problem for travel agents. On the other hand, it's probably going to be just fine for hotels because software doesn't change what it costs to build a hotel. And that was true for sort of 15 years until Airbnb changes what a hotel means. And so it's kind of tricky to make those kinds of predictions in advance. I think there's a historian called Hugh Trevor Roper who said history teaches us nothing except that something will happen. And so there are some patterns that repeat and that clearly are repeating now. There are others where it's harder to say what's going to happen. What is this going to need? What will GPT mean for professional services? What will it mean for search and internet publishing and the nature of advertising? Never mind, what does it mean in 5 years for everything else? Those questions are always much harder to answer.
Raoul, do you agree with Benedict's sentiment? Or do you see this completely fundamentally different this time around?
I think history will repeat and it will be a bubble cycle, much like the internet. Out of that, out of the ashes rises the phoenix. I'm just with the David Bowie quote about the internet back in 97, I think it was, where he said, Jeremy Paxman was interviewing him, and he said, what, it's more than just whatever it was. And he said, it's an alien life form. And he was so right. The disruption that is coming on the back of this is much more profound than yet we understand. How? I don't know. None of us know. Because, Benedict was talking about software.
Yep.
This is software that lives. Again, people can't get their head around what is software that lives on its own, that can learn.
What do you mean by
on its
the
own.
software lives?
Well, it adapts, it can learn, it can grow, it can change form, knowledge, understanding, as humans do. So that's living software. We're not used to that. We're used to code. This is not code. So much so that Anthropic have to create a sort of MRI machine to try and understand how the network or how the LLM actually works. Nobody knows.
Yeah, I think large language model, before Anthropic mapping the data, understand more, most of them are just black box. We don't know which set of data actually make difference.
It's the same as the human brain. We have MRI machines. We can see the electric pulses. We have no idea how it works. It's the same with LLMs.
So this is a perfect segue for my next question. Benedict, and this I will ask you the same question as well. Do you think the current hype, by the way, for those who attended my keynote yesterday will know how I feel about AGI, but do you think the current hype on AGI is people utilizing or leveraging mankind's God complex?
There's a bunch of ways we could talk about this. One of them is, look, there's a bunch of people saying very silly things about AGI. And you can just as people said very silly things about crypto or indeed about the internet, the internet was going to end all war because now everyone would understand each other. So were aeroplanes, by the way, because there's no borders in the sky. And so you kind of have to discount like all the dumb stuff that people say, and then you kind of come back to the concept. And one of the reasons I like the kind of God analogy, incidentally, is you have a bunch of people who are kind of trying to reason about what the nature of AGI is, rather the way you see medieval theologians trying to reason out the nature of God from first principles. And so you can somehow create knowledge out of mathematics. And you can't do that. You don't know. I think maybe a more serious answer is that, again, a comparison I often use is that when we built the Apollo program, we had a theory of gravity, and we had a theory of rockets, and we understood the chemistry and the physics and the mechanics of how the rocket worked. We knew what would happen if you wanted to make the rocket 25% bigger or have 25% more thrust. You knew what to do. You also knew why it went up, and you knew how far away the moon was, And so in principle, you could have given the specs for the Apollo program to Isaac Newton, and he could have done the maths and told you whether it will get to the moon or not. And we don't have any equivalence of any of those for intelligence or for AGI. We don't have like a coherent model of what our intelligence is. We have lots of theories for bits of it, but rather, as Raoul was saying, we can kind of do the MRI and see, well, it's lots of brain cells and neurons, but we don't know what it is that we have that a dog or an octopus or a dolphin or a monkey doesn't have, and how they're different from each other, or how to plot them on a chart. We also don't really know how you could plot GPT on that same chart and say, well, it's growing at a given rate, and in September 2027 it will pass people. There was kind of a preposterous
100%.
thing that went around earlier this week of like a chart that says, well, ChatGPT will reach AI researchers in the summer of 2027. It's like, you don't know any of that. But the challenge here is, like, and the problem, so all conversations about AGI tend to become hunts for analogies for this reason. So people say, well, it's like nuclear weapons, or it's like this, or it's like that, and I've just said it's like rockets. And it's a useful analogy, but it's not complete, because we all know that a rocket wouldn't get to the moon unless you had all of those theories. Whereas it is, at least in principle, possible that LLMs might get to AGI, whatever AGI means, and that itself is a problem. It's a thought experiment, it's not really a thing. It's possible that LLMs will scale all the way to something that in some sense has some kind of equivalent intelligence to people. We have no way of knowing whether that's the case or not. Some people think it might, and it's probably going in that direction. And it may get there in 5 years or 50 years. It may be that we require an unknown number of other theoretical breakthroughs to get there. I think most people would agree in principle there's no reason why AGI can't exist or can't be created. But we don't know how. We don't really know what it would be either. And I'll finish with another quote from Isaiah Berlin, who said that even if in principle there is a purpose to the universe, and even if in principle it's discoverable, there's no a priori reason why it would be interesting. So it's possible that we get a quote-unquote AGI, and it's kind of boring.
And also, I think that one of the, I always say, whoever's talking or hyping about AGI, the first question you should ask them is, really, give me your detailed definition of what is AGI. Often people cannot come up with a definition. So, Raoul, what's your thought on AGI?
So, I think the history of humanity is a history of the application of technology. This is just part of that. It's my view, and has been for a while, that the inevitable outcome of the evolution of mankind is AGI. It has to be. And don't forget, we just started life as DNA and RNA that turned up somehow in whatever bacteria arrived on Earth, and how that happened, we don't even really know. And that's just code. And that code has replicated and split and split and split, and it ends up with AGI. Is this part of evolution of humanity? I don't know. What is AGI? I think it's irrelevant. It's like, I wrote an article about consciousness, because people are debating, are these LLMs conscious? Nobody knows what consciousness is. So we don't even know any of these things. So we just have to accept it's something. It's something, it feels like part of evolution, and we just have to observe it. Now, to your point, it's not today, although I think they're more sentient and conscious than we yet believe. And I've seen a lot of work that's happening in that, just even randomly. And again, we can't define consciousness, we can't define sentience, but there's something there. But today it's not that. What will it be tomorrow? What will it be in a year's time? What will it be in 5 years' time? I don't see a plateauing of that yet. But again, we don't know whether there is a plateau in this.
So let's come down from the God complex to unearth a little bit. You involve in Web3 a lot. Where are the meaningful interjunction and convergence you see between Web3 and AI?
So as we move into an agentic-based world, so that's multiple AI agents, all of those have a cost. So even if they can be autonomous, they have a cost, which is compute. last time I checked, AI can't get a driving license and therefore can't get a bank account. Right? So it's a real problem. So they're going to have to pay each other for compute. Blockchain rails are a pretty decent way of solving that. The other, I think, more pressing one will happen quite quickly over the US election, which is proof of humanity. Because the problem is you can create such enormous fake content, fake people. And again, I'm thinking of AI as people, essentially. So you're going to have to prove who's who. I think the tech companies are going to get fined like the banks got fined after 2008. They're going to be the cash machine for every government, and they'll fine them for the next decade over what's AI and what's human. Blockchain is a very, very good way of solving it, which is why Sam Altman started WorldCoin. Everyone was like, what was this weird thing with the orb? It's so awful. Sam Altman saw where this was going, which is like, the moment this happens, we've got a problem.
Let's not start talking about Sam Altman because I have too much to say. Benedict, what's your view on convergence, especially for this audience? I was being a little bit stupid. I only learned recently that Super AI and TOKEN2049 is actually belong to the same group. No wonder this feels a little bit like Mecca and Vatican at the same time. So Ben, for this audience, a lot of people cross over between Web3 and AI. Where do you think it's really meaningful, apart from what Raoul suggested this Web3 authenticates, where AI creates?
I don't know. It's funny. Someone said a while ago that people, well, I was just think about, so two answers to this. I mean, one of them is, I think there's been a huge reduction in the amount of noise and attention devoted to crypto and Web3. And all the tourists and grifters left. And what's left are people building interesting infrastructure and building interesting things that might be consumer applications in like 5 years, maybe. In 5 years, maybe you'll be able to build an Instagram on a blockchain, and maybe that will be useful, maybe not, but it's interesting, and we'll see. Clearly, there's kind of questions around provenance, authentication, around linking things to, and ways of linking that to some kind of validated distributed databases is potentially interesting as well. The challenge I have with the theory that there's going to be a wave of fake content and so we need authentication is there's actually already loads of fake content. It's actually a distribution problem. It's not a creation problem. So if you look at the war in Gaza, there's loads of people posting pictures of explosions and demolished buildings, and they didn't make them with AI. They're just pictures from Syria or somewhere else, and until they actually are from Gaza. And you can post a picture of an explosion and say anything you like about it, as long as it looks probably it's in that part of the world. So you can overstate how much putting a watermark on that can prove when it was taken is really going to help you. And a lot of that remains kind of a human problem, a distribution problem, a networks problem, as much as it is a problem of tying some authentication to that picture or to that person. Meanwhile, I think both for generative AI and for crypto, it's still so sort of early that it's probably unwise to have strong opinions. I keep, it's like the joke about, the HR team that want to hire somebody who's got 10 years experience working with OpenAI. It's like, none of this worked 18 months ago at all. So it's still very early in trying to work out what those questions will look like. It may be that in a year we're not talking about agents anymore. Maybe the whole thing didn't work at all and we're talking about something else. So maybe, but we'll see.
So what is the significance of this current wave then? If it's just another software, is there any significance you see?
Sorry, with what kind?
Significance of generative AI and large language model in terms of the evolution of this machine-human interaction.
So, one of the ways I try and describe this to people completely outside tech is that in the 19th century and sort of the 20th century, we automated things that are hard for people to do but easy for people to explain. So it's very easy to say, I want 200 holes in this piece of metal exactly 1 inch apart. Or I want you to calculate the mortgage in this way 1 million times over and over again in exactly the same way. And so that gets you production lines and factories and steam engines and data processing and databases and mainframes and so on, and ATMs. However, there's also a class problem that is easy for people to do, but hard for people to explain. Like, how exactly can you tell that's a cat? And these questions often look simple until you try and actually write down a series of logical steps. And you discover actually it's really, really hard to explain the difference between a cat and a dog to a computer that has no concept of three-dimensional space. And it never really works. And what machine learning did was change this from a logic problem into a statistics problem. And so turn it into a pattern recognition problem. And we discover that basically solved all quote-unquote AI problems. And we spent the last 10 years thinking, well, what could we turn into pattern recognition? And that got us thousands of billion-dollar companies, for picking a number out of the air. It got us a lot of big companies and a lot of new features and a lot of new capabilities inside existing companies. Now, at the absolute minimum, we have another wave of that, but bigger. So we have a huge wave of stuff that you couldn't automate before, and now you can. One of the phrases I heard recently was cognitive manual labor. It's the stuff that you've got to do. It's a pain in the ass, but it's really boring, and your computer ought to be able to do it, but can't. And the analogy I always used to give about the last wave of machine learning was that it gives you infinite interns. So like, you would like to listen to every call coming into the call center and see if the customer's angry, except you have 1 million calls a day and you don't have enough people. You could do an intern. An intern could do that, but you don't have enough interns. Now you can automate that. So you get this whole class of stuff that like any 15-year-old could do. Now you can automate. Someone else I know said AI will do anything you could train a dog to do, which is also a useful analogy because you're never completely sure what you've trained the dog to do. It's doing what you told it, but that may not be what you think you told it. It's a slightly different thing. And like, there's a base case here that says, well, that's this. Back to my comparison in the 19th century, like, just the steam engine meant we went from having, I don't know, a couple of million horses in the UK to having the equivalent power of 50 or 100 million horses for free, more or less. So you have each of these waves of automation give you all of this extra stuff for free, this massive increase in capability in what you can automate, what you can do, what you can build. And the result is that, 200 years ago, most of us were peasants. And we lived in a hut, and we worried about whether the harvest would fail. And now most people in this room, I think, have never worried about what the harvest is going to be this year. That's kind of what we've achieved, and we'll just carry on achieving more of that.
Yeah,
Now then there's the more aggressive view that says, no, it's much more than that. And for that, we'll see.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter, someone tweeted, I want my machine to do all the laundries and wash the dishes so I can create and write poem. And
not the other way around.
Yes, not the way around, but it is the other way around right now. So, Raoul, majority of the audience, people who attend this conference, are not from that 4 or 5 companies controlling all the economic opportunities. In fact, a lot of audience are trying or already on their way to have their startup and try to take this opportunity to create something useful. And what would be your advice, given?
Yeah, there's actually a magic opportunity right now between those who use the technology and those who don't. And there's going to be a window, we saw it with the internet as well, where you can gain a competitive advantage. That may not be persistent, but it's definitely here now. And it's going to affect every single industry. And to the point we were talking about before, the other thing we have to remember is whatever you think it is today is not what it is. This thing learns at an exponential rate like children learn. It is only a year and a half old. At a year and a half old, it already has an IQ, a measurable IQ, whatever that means, of 100 or so. We don't know where this is going. You have to start now. I think Benedict made the point before, which is the problem is we don't know what it's going to be in 3 months' time. It's really difficult to build on. But so you don't build a business based on wrappers. Build your business to be a wrapper. I use the technology, let OpenAI or whoever build the underlying and drive your own business. Whether you're a lawyer, whether you're in construction, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in the restaurant business, whether you're in anything, it will completely change your game.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that, I mean, if you think about what happened with the last wave of machine learning, there were people who were saying, well, we're going to be the image recognition platform, or we're going to be the lateral language platform. And that just got subsumed into Google and Amazon and Microsoft and so on, because of course it did, just because it was just commodity infrastructure. But then, I mean, we invested in a company called Everlaw, which is cloud platform for legal discovery. So you see someone, they send you a truck full of paper, what do you do with it? And you can imagine kind of the tools you'd want to build for that. So then machine learning happens, and OK, now they can do translation. Now they can transcribe the voicemails. Now they can do cluster analysis and say, find other emails like this one. Find me suspicious emails, find me angry emails, find me anomalous emails. Are they worried about competition from Google and Amazon? Like, no. They use Google's translation and Amazon's sentiment analysis, and they use translation from Azure or whatever it is that they do, but they're not an Azure wrapper. And because if you're a law firm, you can't just go and buy Amazon's translation API, because you've got an Office 365 installation if you're a modern company, and you're drafting your documents in Word, and you can't just go and buy a sentiment analysis API. You can't use that. And we're frankly at the same stage now with ChatGPT. You can't, if you're a law firm, you can't just go and use ChatGPT. I mean, you can use a little bit of it, but what you actually, the things you would actually want it for that would be really useful, you need a whole bunch of other product built around that.
Yes.
And we're going to see this again with LLMs. There will be companies where this is enabling a feature, or companies where this is making a feature work better, or companies where the whole product couldn't really have existed without this, but that's not what the company is. The company is this whole other bunch of stuff built on top. And we saw this with cloud, we saw it with machine learning, we saw it with mobile. Probably not a good idea to make a, make a web browser for the iPhone. Okay. But on the other hand, there's an awful lot of successful businesses building apps for the iPhone. Don't compete with the commodity infrastructure, but think about what is it that you build around that and on top of that.
So for those who are parents, have kids, and or for individuals of any age who are lifelong learners, what should people learn? What kind of education we should provide for the next generation that will be somewhat future-proof?
So my point of view on this is education changes entirely. The application of education changes entirely. The best thing to be is human. If we're going to find a purpose in a world where jobs are changed over time, the thing that we can do that an LLM can't do is be human. We can have experiences. We can come to Singapore. We can all get together. We can meet people. Do that. Realize that experiences, nature, and community, whether it's digital-based communities or physical community, there's something in that, and humans will find a purpose doing that. So when you see kids saying they want to be an influencer, and the parents roll their eyes, they're right. They're already being adaptive. Same as the kids who grew up playing games, and the parents rolled their eyes, they're right, because we're headed into a digital kind of metaversal world eventually. So the kids are right, they're being adaptive. Let them do that.
So I was very disturbed to saw on social media this girl get the voice ChatGPT to call her babe, and have this conversation completely flirtatious. And she's all smitten in that video. And you talk about human connection, but those kind of technology actually reduce human connection.
They can do, but that plays its role too. There's a lot of lonely people in the world. We've seen this already in Japan for a decade and a half, 2 decades now. So that trend is not going to go away. They will be your friend. I mean, I speak a lot to my ChatGPT. It is incredibly good.
Does your ChatGPT call you babe?
No. But you can have really in-depth conversations. When the new GPT 4.0 voice thing comes in the next few weeks or whatever, that's another game changer. So I think it helps people. We're already digitized. Kids already live in Minecraft or Roblox. They already live on Instagram or TikTok. We can't pretend that's not there. So digital friends, are they any different? If it's
Ben, what do you
living
think?
software, maybe this is the line.
There's a quote from Douglas Adams, so I won't get exactly right, but he basically said, anything created before you're about 15 is amazing and exciting and wonderful. Anything created between sort of 15 and 35 is kind of fun and interesting, and you should get a job in it. And anything created when you're older than 35 is the end of life and civilization, and just, it's a threat to the world order. And, the funny thing is about this Twitter account called Pessimist's Archive, and he posts these things which today seem like parodies because it's now so obvious that that wasn't a problem that we can't even believe, it seems ridiculous that people are talking about this. So bicycles are a problem. Novels make young women infertile. Comic books are making children delinquent. Punk music was definitely going to destroy civilization. Disco, skateboards, computer games, obviously, television. Now it's screen time. It does feel like the screen time panic is kind of fading away as we realize there's basically zero evidence for worrying about screen time or worrying about, seeing too much blue light. These are all just kind of fantasies that we create about each new technology, and we sort of forget that people worried about it. We forget that people wondered if traveling in a train at 20 or 30 miles an hour might somehow violate the laws of physics and cause your head to explode. But people thought that was a thing. People were worried about this stuff. And so, there's an obvious logical fallacy here, and that just because people thought X in the past and were wrong, that doesn't mean that if they think Y today, they must be wrong too. But, you have to remember how many things we've worried about in the past that looked just like this that turned out to be okay.
Last question. We have 30 seconds. Rapid fire. Drake or Kendrick Lamar? Sorry. No. This question only makes sense for people who spend a lot of time on Twitter. Yan LeCun or Elon Musk? Benedict.
What, you're asking Space Karen or Yan LeCun? I don't know. I have very little time for Elon Musk and the way he presents himself. So I'll leave it at that.
The intellectual snobbery
So
of Yan is something I find slightly abhorrent, so I'll go with Elon.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Benedict Evans and Raoul Pal, thank you very much.
It's a brilliant, brilliant event, and you'll come away with lots of new ideas and a better understanding of this incredible exponential world. You get to speak to the smartest people like you trying to figure this out, but also the people on stage. They're the experts. So we get all of that, all in one place, in Singapore. What more can you ask? See you at TOKEN2049.
Hey there, revolutionaries. To join a community sharing insights like you just watched, head over to realvision.com. There you will get unbiased insights and exclusive access to the very best, brightest, and biggest names in finance. Be a part of our community of lifelong learners. See you there.